We are, all of us, the residents of a swiftly shrinking globe, where what was once local is fast becoming global, and our decisions and opinions resonate well beyond our own borders. Join me each week, your host, Al Zucaro, from the epicenter of the Western Hemisphere, Boca Raton, Florida, in sunny South Palm Beach County, for a pointed look at politics, immigration, culture, and what it means to be a citizen of the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Citizens of the World. This is Al Zucaro in transit. I'm traveling from Bogota, Colombia to Washington, D.C. It is the day after the presidential debates. I can't get to the studio. I'll have a lot to talk about. In the meantime, I want to tell you a little bit about Colombia on the next show. I'm looking forward to some interviews with people I did down there. An incredible country. Believe me, if you have the opportunity to go to Bogota, please do. It is a wonderful experience. Tonight, however, because I can't make it to the studios, I did some selection of some clips from the past, and I hope you enjoyed it, and a little bit of commentary with regards to the upcoming election. In the meantime, you be good, you take care, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye now.
Thanks, Al. Tony Macaluso here again, and Citizens of the World. Today, I'd like to just give you a little of insights. The last month or so, I've been traveling, and one of my trips took me up into Toronto, Canada. Canada, as I reported in the previous sessions a couple of months ago, is one of our leading purchasers of real estate, particularly here in Florida. They have purchased $2 billion worth of Florida real estate. In fact, in 2007, which everyone concludes was a terrible year, they spent about $2.7 billion here in Florida real estate. 8% of all the homes sold that year were to Canadian buyers. It's kind of interesting. Of 100% of the international buyers that enter the Florida market, 36% of them come from Canada. So they are a very meaningful part of our real estate business here, and we certainly want to encourage that. And one of the reasons is that the Canadian dollar now has been trading at or above parity with the U.S. dollar. In my early part of my career, I remember Canadians lamenting the fact that their currency was only worth about 80 cents on the dollar, and at one point it went down to 68 cents. So now that their money trades about even with the U.S. currency, and the price of properties have gone down substantially from any of them that were shopping here in the 03 to 06 period, they certainly see us as a real bargain and very affordable. One of the interesting parts is that the banks in Canada are very strong. They didn't do any crazy lending schemes at all. They still required 20% down. And so the equities in properties in Canada has actually provided the cash that they bring here to buy U.S. real estate. The average rate of a home, the typical price in the U.S., last I checked, was about $127,000. And up in Canada, it's $365,000 for a home. Until you go out to the West Coast and then the Vancouver area and beyond, house prices there are ranging about $700,000, and they are the source of buyers for properties in Arizona, in Phoenix in particular. They're driving the market where they can pick up $70,000 to $100,000 condominiums to get away from the cold during the winter months. We see Canada as one of our leading trade partners now. About 9 out of 10 of these Canadians buy for cash because what they do is obtain equity loans from their properties, which have quite a bit of equity. And while I was in Toronto, we were there for 2 days at a real estate trade show where there were 8,000 real estate professionals that went through the gates within those 2 days. Actually, it was a little higher than that. It was 4,400 the first day, and 3,900 were there at the start of the day at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sure they exceeded that. So it was in excess of 8,000 real estate professionals, all of them very up on U.S. properties. They were also up on the price appreciation that occurred in Canada. Their appreciation has been running about 7.7% per year, and so it is one of those very attractive markets, although it's becoming more and more difficult to find any bargains there. But we did see that developers were announcing new projects, much like we saw happening here in the U.S. The real question, I guess, for the future is whether or not they're going to experience the same type of bubble occurring in their economy. But again, with the fact that they're still running to strict banking rules with 20% down and not doing anything really crazy. Of course, most of them come down here with that cash, and the foreign buyers as a whole, about 64% now are paying cash, so they don't have to go to our somewhat dysfunctional banking system to get their loans to buy U.S. real estate. So they take their equity out of their homes in Canada, come down here, and of course they're looking for vacation, resort, retirement areas, and of course any place where they have family and friends are one of those areas that are very desirable. The parents of students that are coming down here to school are also a large source of real estate business here in the States, because rather than pay the housing costs to many universities, they prefer to actually invest in a piece of real estate that can house not only their student, but perhaps get rent from leasing out other bedrooms. Similar that was to a program that's here known as the Kitty Condo program under the FHA program. We have 3 million Canadian visitors every year visiting Florida, which represents about 10% of the Florida population. Our Canadian friends are good quality home buyers. They look for good quality properties. They are going to be a sustaining force in our real estate communities probably for the foreseeable future. And I can tell you from my experience up in Canada, they're gracious hosts. We had a wonderful time there. I look forward to going to Toronto again next year when they have again this real estate expo, including education as well as a trade show that was pretty remarkable. So until the next time we meet, we citizens of the world are all together, and let me just turn it back to the main show. Thank you.
Good evening once again, everyone. In doing some research, I came across a piece that was put together by several people, and I think you'd be interested in hearing about it. And I'm going to call this piece When. When. He refused to disclose who donated money to his campaign as other candidates had done. People said, don't worry. When he received endorsements from people like Louis Farrakhan, Muammar Gaddafi, Hugo Chavez, people said it didn't matter. When it was pointed out that he was a total newcomer, had absolutely no experience at anything except community organizing, people said it didn't matter. When he chose friends and acquaintances such as Bill Ayers and Bernadette Doran, who were revolutionary radicals, the mainstream media told us, don't worry. When his voting record in the Illinois Senate and the U.S. Senate came into question, once again the media told us, don't worry. When he refused to wear a flag lapel pin and did so after only public outcry, the mainstream media said, don't worry, he just forgot. When people started treating him as a messiah who could walk on water, and our children started singing in school because they were taught to sing his praises by their teachers, the mainstream media told us, don't worry. When he stood with hands over his groin area, the playing of the national anthem and Pledge Allegiance, people said, it doesn't matter. When he surrounded himself in the White House with advisors who were radical left-winger, pro-gun control, pro-abortion, and wanting to curtail freedom of speech to silence the opposition, the mainstream media said, don't worry. When he said he favors sex education in kindergarten, including homosexual indoctrination, mainstream media said, that's the world we live in. When his personal background was scrubbed or hidden, and nothing could be found about him except what he told us, the mainstream media said, don't worry. When the place of his birth was called into question, and he refused to produce a birth certificate, we were told, don't worry, it'll be released at some point. And when it was, it may very well be a forgery. When he had an association with Chicago mobster Tony Resco, who is now in prison, and remember helped Obama with a sweet deal on the purchase of his home. Mainstream media said, that's just the way they do it in Chicago. Don't worry. When it became known that George Soros, a multi-billionaire Marxist and self-hating Jew, spent a ton of money to get him elected, people said, Soros doesn't expect anything, don't worry. When he started appointing White House czars that were radicals, revolutionaries, and even avowed Marxist communists, people said, don't worry. When he stood before the nation and told us that it was his intention to fundamentally change this nation into something else, the media told us, that's just rhetoric. Don't worry. When it became known that he had trained Acorn agents and workers in Chicago and served as an attorney for Acorn and defended their positions, we were told, don't worry. When he appointed cabinet members and advisors who were tax cheats and socialists, people said, it doesn't matter, all politicians do that. When he appointed a science czar, John Holdren, who believes in forced abortions, mass sterilizations, and seizing babies from teen mothers, we were told, it doesn't mean anything, it'll never happen. When he appointed Cass Sunstein as regulatory czar, who believes in explicit consent, harvesting human organs without family consent, and allowing animals to be represented in court, while banning all hunting, people said it didn't matter. Well, folks, it does matter. And when are you going to start to care? November is when you do something about it. Thank you and good night.
If tomorrow all the things were gone.
Thanks, Al. Well, citizens of the world, what I'm going to be talking about this segment is something that is vitally important to most of the Floridians. When Al and I were at the Summit of the Americas not too long ago, one of the presenters that made a very effective presentation was actually representing the Port of Miami. And he was talking about all the anticipation they have in expansion in order to prepare for what's going to happen in 2014. Well, for those of you who believe in the Mayan calendar, or after December of 12, we might not be here, but as far as the Panamanians are concerned, 2014 is the completion date for the new Panama Canal. This new canal will be able to transport through it the largest of oil tankers, which is going to put a new dimension on where oil comes from and goes to. It will be able to take the largest of the cruise line ships, and so that should represent also a boon in the cruise industry as well, going from one side to the other without having to traverse all around South America. So let me just talk about this article today, and this was in the May issue of Florida Trend magazine, what Florida means. And it was kind of interesting that one of the reports in there talk about how the Florida's 15 ports are united in moving the state forward for international trade. Now, that may not seem much to most of you, but if you're one of those people who are looking for a job, this could be our savior from now and into the future. A few years ago, when West Palm Beach was considering putting in an additional slip, part of the presentations that I was privileged to sit through at the Port of Palm Beach was what the impact was in jobs in the amount of activity going through the port. And the study showed that $1 billion worth of port activity, which we enjoyed at the time, was actually responsible for 40,000 local jobs. 40,000. And so in increasing the capacity of the port, it was then thought that we would also be increasing the amount of employment base that would be here in Palm Beach County and beyond. Now, it's kind of interesting because not only did they go ahead forward with the new slip, but if any of you are familiar with the port area, they also put in an overpass for container ships or container operations, had to stop at the light at US 1 before they could go further west to where all these containers were being stored. That represented a considerable logistical problem in moving things very rapidly, so they built about a 1-mile stretch It's an overpass, so there is no barriers now to getting from the port to where the containers are being held. And similarly, what has been discussed in recent years, and probably will come to pass, is one of the areas of unemployment that seems to be chronic is out by the Glades, out by Lake Okeechobee. So what is kind of being talked about now is running rail lines, both from the Port of Miami and from the Port of West Palm Beach, and form free trade zones that are out there at the Glades area. This would mean continued unemployment for stevedores, for all of the others that are related to the logistics of the shipping businesses. And the fact is that these are anticipated through 2014, when we will have a huge volume of activity going through, as we are some of the nearest ports to the Panama Canal as you come north through the Gulf of Mexico and into the Atlantic. So this addition of what we did here in Palm Beach County will be multifold through all of the ports. And the biggest ports that are cited are the Jacksonville, Port of Jacksonville, Jacksport, Port Canaveral, Port Everglades down in the Lauderdale area, Port Miami, which we saw the presentations on, which was pretty incredible, Tampa, not taking any back seat, and Port Manatee, just a little south of Tampa, as well as some of the smaller ports. Pensacola has a port, so does Panama City, so does Port St. Joe. We have a couple of other smaller ones in Fort Pierce, as well as Port Citrus, which is up near Cedar Key in the west coast of Florida. Now, of course, we're not the only ones gearing up. I'm quite sure that the people in New Orleans are getting ready for a huge influx, as is some of the Gulf Coast locations as well. But this could be an incredible boon to Florida employment when these come in. The free trade zone out there by the lake will certainly improve employment opportunities for the folks that live out there as well. The rail lines, again, need to be fortified and be able to support the kind of bulk traffic that's going to be put on them. And we should see that these port activities are going to be significantly impacting Florida through international trade. And therein lies where the connection is to the citizens of the world. International trade coming through the new Panama Canal will certainly increase the activities going on here, and probably even other ports further up the east coast of the United States. And with that in mind, just keep an eye on the employment one ads, because you're liable to find some employers starting to gear up for the anticipated boon in traffic. Again, Tony Macaluso here for Citizens of the World, and may your ports be in your future.
Good evening, everyone. You know that statement, lies, damn lies, and what politicians say? Well, how about lies, damn lies, and what Obama says? Why does Obama consistently lie? Let me take you back to last December 23rd, when ABC News on their 2020 news program did a segment from the White House on the occasion of the Christmas holidays. Barbara Walters, in her painfully fawning interview with the President and the First Lady, got the interview rolling with the tough questions like, to the President, if you were a superhero and you could have one superpower, what would that be? His answer, flying. And the question to the First Lady, if you were to die and come back as a person or a thing, what would you come back as? And she thought, and she said, Bo, the family dog. I honestly believe I was going to hear the next question, if you were a tree, what kind of a tree would you be? Those of us who remember the dating game remember those types of questions. Then against this backdrop of holiday cheer and warmth came the big question. Mr. President, on what occasion do you lie? Obama, thinking, said, usually the only time I lie is for very personal interactions with family members. Like, honey, that's a wonderful dress, when it really isn't. Chimed in the First Lady, things where the truth would hurt others. Right, echoed Obama. The things where truth would hurt other people. Not too many big things. I said during the campaign that I'll always tell you the truth and what I think. And I'll always tell you where I stand. I'm not perfect, but you'll know what I believe. There you have it, folks. Welcome to the Matrix, where the elite media specialize in creating virtual reality scenes like this one, which are so pleasant and seem so real, except that they bear virtually no resemblance to the truth. For there, seated in the midst of the elegant Norman Rockwell Christmas setting, was Barack Obama, the perpetually churning and discontented radical, taking a needed break from his relentless campaign to fundamentally transform, that means destroy, the American way of free enterprise and free people. Barack Hussein Obama, the man who lies as easily as breathing, a serial deceiver regarding his birth, his childhood, his education, his influences and associations, his religions, his accomplishments, his policies, his true beliefs, and his plans for America's future. Barack Hussein Obama, the man whose entire presidency has been a seamless fabric of deception and duplicity, tells Barbara Walters, that noted journalist, quote unquote, and the American people that the only time he lies is to protect a family member from hurt feelings by occasionally offering reassurance that an unflattering dress is wonderful. The level of ongoing media dishonesty in covering Barack Hussein Obama is of course surreal. But let us now focus our attention on the man who is, in all likelihood, the most perfectly dishonest person ever to occupy the Oval Office. After all, the correct answer to Walter's question is painfully obvious. When does Obama lie? Every single time he opens his mouth to speak. As another longtime ABC News personality, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist George Will pointed out recently in his column in the Washington Post, Barack Obama's intellectual sociopathy is often breezy and sometimes loudish indifference to truth. It should no longer startle anyone. Sociopathy is a strong word, but used by many to describe Obama, not as a clinical diagnosis, but as a definition of the man. Sociopaths are often well-liked because of their charm and high charisma, but they do not usually care about other people. They think mainly of themselves and often blame others for the things that they do. They have a complete disregard for rules and lie consistently. They seldom feel guilt or learn from punishments. Remind you of anyone? A friend of mine who is a psychologist suggested Barack Hussein Obama suffers from narcissistic personality disorder. He mentioned some signs of this disorder. 1. A grandiose view of one's achievements. 2. An utter inability to handle criticism. 3. Lack of genuine empathy. Remind you of anyone? Regardless of what you call it, we're dealing with a person who absolutely does not consider serial lying to be in any way immoral or problematic. For a super ambitious and vain-glorious person such as Barack Hussein Obama, lying is as vital as breathing. Lies open doors that would otherwise remain shut. Thus, in a very real sense, for Obama, lies are magic words. One day, to reflect the aspirations for hope and change of 1 million Americans, appearing as all things to all people, has been the key to his meteoric rise, requiring constant deception. As one blogger put it recently, he is Muslim, he is Christian, he's a capitalist, he's a socialist, he is black, he is white, he's a constitutional professor, he's an average collegian who smoked dope and did cocaine, he's a foreigner, he is American-born, he is an everyman. With America now in precipitous decline on his watch, many have tried to explain the enigma of Obama and his ability to lie so confidently, comfortably, and continually. Some cite the disturbing degree to which Obama manifests full-blown clinical symptoms of narcissism. Some cite his far-left ideology, whether you label it liberalism, progressivism, socialism, left-wing radicalism, whatever you label it, as long as these measures seem to advance their glorious utopian cause. Exhibit A, for this point, would be the entire 20th century. Some cite Obama's childhood, which was awful, and others cite his early influences, which were even more horrible. I am not a trained physician or psychologist, but my street smarts tell me that sometime in his formative years, Obama was basically and seriously traumatized. His mother disregarded him, dragged him all over the place, and ultimately abandoned him. Apparently, he was left in the care of communist Frank Marshall Davis, an admitted child molester. Some cite Obama's religious background, his 20-year affiliation with his spiritual mentor, by a right. Some cite his background in Chicago politics. Some cite his education, the most important part of which, by his own admission, was delivered by Saul Alinsky. That, folks, is one of the most twisted things I've ever heard. To believe in Saul Alinsky and act on it is to abandon your greatest gift, your conscience. Maybe that's why Alinsky dedicated Rules for Radicals to Lucifer. In the final analysis, Obama lies because that's how he gets his way. And getting his way is all he cares about. Thank you and good evening.
I will not pretend the hard times are over. Difficult days lie ahead. More jobs will be lost, more plants will close. More dealerships will shut their doors, and so will many parts suppliers. But I want you to know that what you're doing is making a sacrifice for the next generation. A sacrifice you may not have chose to make, but a sacrifice you were nevertheless called to make so that your children and all of our children can grow up in America that still makes things.
Well, the Democrats' way of running this country is to go tell us all how we ought to make sacrifices. God, they're great on that stuff. But they're all going to have us over the hill to the poorhouse. We ain't going to be able to drive over there because we ain't got no gas, so we're going to have to walk it.
Now, let me be clear. Let me be absolutely clear, because I know you'll end up hearing some of the same claims that rolling back these tax breaks means a massive tax increase on the American people.
I want my insurance back.
Now, Archie, I'm afraid it's not as simple as that. You see, this little code listing up here in the corner indicates you're in what we call an HRN.
HRN, what's that?
A high-risk neighborhood.
What is that?
Well, Uncle Archie, now let me make this perfectly clear.
Where have I heard that before?
Let me be absolutely clear.
Because you ain't going to sell me none of your progressive pink or welfare ideas.
So what have you got against welfare?
Everything. I am sick and tired of people like you giving away my hard-earned money to a bunch of families who ain't even related to me.
Last month we marked the 8th anniversary of the attacks on 9/11, and on that terrible day when terrorists brought so much death and destruction on our shores and so many lives were lost, many of you were the first on the scenes, saving lives, working tirelessly to bring those responsible to justice, and guarding against future attacks in subsequent weeks and months and years.
And that's your stick-ups and your skyjackers, which, if that was up to me, I could end the skyjackers tomorrow.
You could?
All you got to do is arm all your passengers. And if he ain't got no more superiority there, he ain't going to dare to pull out no rod. And then your airlines, then they wouldn't have to chase the passengers on the ground no more. They just pass out the pistols at the beginning of the trip, and they pick them up again at the end. Case closed.
Because, you know, it is just wonderful to be back in Oregon, and over the last 15 months we've traveled to every corner of the United States. I've now been in 57 states. I think one left to go. Alaska and Hawaii I was not allowed to go to, even though I really wanted to visit, but my staff would not justify it.
And meathead, dead from the neck up. Meathead.
We are, all of us, the residents of a swiftly shrinking globe, where what was once local is fast becoming global, and our decisions and opinions resonate well beyond our own borders. Join me each week, your host, Al Zucaro, from the epicenter of the Western Hemisphere, Boca Raton, Florida, in sunny South Palm Beach County, for a pointed look at politics, immigration, culture, and what it means to be a citizen of the world.
Ow, 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 ow. What? getting a mommy tattoo.
Ow, ow, ow. Am I crying? I'm not crying. Am I crying?
Sweating on the inside? Handle it on the outside with new Speed Stick Power.
I love her so much.
Aww.
Speed Stick. Don't sweat it. Handle it.